Oh, good. Okay, so this obviously is the first event, so it's going to be quite kind of an introductory event more so. So the first introductions I thought was worth making was actually that of the IFE Southern Branch Committee. So you can see these faces on the screen. This makes up the current IFE Southern Branch Committee. Myself, I'm Rhiannon Williams, and I am the Early Careers representative for the Southern Branch Committee. Also on the call today is Dean Morris, who's branch president, Joe Hart, and if any of you are joining from UCLan, you'll certainly be familiar with Joe Hart's face. He's vice president, and also on the call is Saskia Stimpson-Wright, who is the branch secretary, and is also going to be delivering today's technical CPD session on incoming changes to guidance. So throughout the duration of these events, over the next coming events, hopefully we'll be able to build kind of a professional relationship up, and you'll become a bit more familiar with everybody who is part of this committee. So who are these events aimed at? It sounds like a very daft question. Of course, they're aimed at early career professionals. But when we think about early career professionals, we generally think kind of those within the first few years of their career in the fire industry. But that's quite a niche way of looking at it. And actually, an early career professional can be anyone under any of these umbrellas, really. So that's students, recent graduates, apprentices, people that might have taken a career break and actually coming back into the industry, possibly through illness or parental leave. And also people that might be kind of later on in the stages of their career and actually taking a completely different avenue and venturing into the fire industry, having done something else prior. So these events are aimed at any of these people and potentially more as well. So what are the events? What's the aim of the events? So the Southern Branch are running these events to provide early career professionals with focus, knowledge and guidance, and that's to support both your personal and professional growth and development in the fire industry. And as cliche as it sounds, it's to provide a supportive and inclusive environment where no question is a silly question and we can all help each other and mentor each other. And another really important aspect of these events is giving early career professionals the opportunity to grow both a supportive and a professional network through collaboration with both people that you wouldn't usually work alongside, and also with those that are in the same stages or similar stages of their career as yourself. And how are these events going to run? So the intention is that the Southern Branch will run an event online every 2 months, and these events will incorporate a range of different both technical CPDs and soft skill CPDs, and we'll be able to develop our knowledge and experience through a range of different CPDs and upskill workshops. So there's a list of the possible CPDs that we're looking or intending to run over the next coming sessions. The quite unique thing about these sessions, which we're hoping to benefit a lot of people, is actually the addition of these soft skill CPDs, which soft skills can be anything, for example, methods of dealing with difficult clients, and those soft skills are absolutely crucial in the fire industry, particularly if you're in a position where you're, for example, undertaking consultancy. And soft skills generally aren't taught through university or training courses. They're generally kind of learned on the job as you go along. So an aim of ours is that everybody will go away from these sessions feeling a lot more confident with their soft skills and able to utilize them in their careers. And that brings us to the most important part of these sessions, and that is that the sessions are for you, they're for early career professionals, but they're also going to be run by you. And what I mean there is that each of these sessions will be adapted to accommodate the needs and wants of their attendees. So this is where feedback from yourselves is absolutely crucial. And at the end of each of these sessions, we will be issuing feedback forms, which we hope that you'll fill in to tell us what was done right, what was done wrong. You can be as brutal as you want, but particularly the most important thing being areas of interest and areas of topics that you would like to cover. And that can be technical, soft skill CPDs, or anything else thinking outside the box. And don't be worried about putting anything on these, because the likeliness is that if you are an early career professionals and there's a certain topic that you want more experience in, that someone else will also be wanting that experience as well. To re-mention as well that a crucial point of early career professionals is to be able to build both a supportive and a professional network. So we also, as a branch, are hoping to run every 4 months a face-to-face networking event. The first one's been proposed for Wednesday, the 15th of November. We don't yet know the location because it will very much depend on kind of where the most amount of our attendees are located, just for ease of travel. But it would be very interesting if we could perhaps gauge, just on this call, I know there's a limited amount of you, but gauge how many of you would actually potentially be interested in joining one of these face-to-face sessions, location dependent. I just wondered whether you could put your hand up on the Teams app. And I unfortunately can't see anything but my presenter's screen. So if Joe or Saskia or Dean could possibly count if there are any hands, that would be great.
Yeah, we've got a few people saying. We've got 5,
Good.
6, most coming in.
Good, fantastic. That's good. Worth doing then. So keep a watch out for that as well. So you'll get in a very short amount of time, you'll get the opportunity to do a little bit of networking with members of the committee and amongst yourselves. But just before to end this introductory couple of slides, I just wanted to end with one of my favorite sayings in particular, and that is, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. Now that can be misinterpreted as quite a somewhat depressing statement, but it's actually very appropriate. It's very appropriate to something that particularly early career professionals do suffer from, and that's, we'll have all heard it before, imposter syndrome. And it's not just relevant to early career professionals. I'm sure that even people in their mid to late careers will also argue that they experience it too. And imposter syndrome is where you get feelings of self-doubt and kind of incompetence, even despite your experience and your capabilities in the role that you do. And this leads to something known as, or is explained by something known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And it gives us this sort of learning curve that everybody throughout the duration of their career or their learning path will experience. And you see my mouse move? No?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, I'll explain then. It's easier. Oh, there we go. So basically, if you look at this curve, the way that this is explained is that when you know absolutely nothing about a subject, you're quite openly honest about the fact that you know nothing about that. So you won't offer an opinion or try and explain it. You're just quite happy to say that you don't know about it. When we then learn a very small amount about a subject, that confidence grows, and we often overestimate how much knowledge we actually have in that subject. And that actually leads to something called a false sense of mastery, where we're quite happy to talk around a subject, but when it gets to the nitty-gritty of it, we actually don't have a clue. And the reason that we have this false sense of mastery is because we don't actually know what we don't know. So the more that you then gain your experience and the more that you then learn, you get this quite brutal drop in this learning curve of confidence, and you end up somewhere down here. And this is where kind of those feelings of imposter syndrome and that lack of confidence and perhaps that demotivation kind of kicks in. You might at this point be looking at your senior peers or your technical directors and thinking, I am never going to know what they know. I'm never going to be in the position or the status that they're in. And the important thing here is that you are on your way there. And it's just hard to recognize that actually this being in this section here doesn't mean that you are incompetent at what you do or you don't have the abilities. It actually just means that every day you've been learning on your journey, and that actually from now, the only way is up. The only way is increasing that competence and increasing your knowledge with it. So I guess what I'm saying is when you hit this point as an early career professional, take 2 seconds to, instead of looking forward everything that you don't know, take a second to look back at everything that you've learned throughout the entire duration of your education or your early career introduction, and see just how far that you've come. And that hopefully these sessions, these early career events, we're hoping that we can actually start pushing you out the other side, both by increasing your confidence and of course increasing your knowledge as well. So that's it for the introduction and my voice, unless you're unlucky enough to get stuck with me in a breakout room. Dean's now going to pop us into separate breakout rooms, and one of the members of the committee will be in each of those rooms just for a very short networking. We were just going to take about another 5 to 10 minutes just to discuss kind of what hopefully other people got feedback. I was too slow, but in relation to kind of who we've met, where people are based roughly, and of course particularly whether there's any feedback, any particular focuses for the upcoming events. I don't know, Joe, do you want to go first? I'm just nitpicking here, like.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had Dwayne, Kyle, and Carissa in my group. One thing that we all happened to work in London, which felt like quite a nice little connection. So actually working with Dwayne on a project, I think by accident, and then a couple of us know each other through that way. But mainly early careers wise, it was one point that I noted that a couple of guys picked up on is that when I started, I interacted only with people in my own company, and actually it was quite nice to network with other people, get other ideas and things like that. And we've got a bit of a different background. So one of your colleagues, Ree from Sweco, so consultant, Carissa in-house in a as a kind of fire safety manager within an organisation, and Dwayne in serving firefighter, so within approvals and reviews as well. So actually networking with different people that we might come across on projects, but from seeing the same problem from different sides, I dare say. So when I mentioned a project to Dwayne, he said, "I'll leave that one to you, Joe." Definitely trying to exonerate himself from me passing anything his way. So a nice opportunity, I think, and I think what some of us were saying we'd like is to see the same problem from different angles, and meet people from other organisations. I think early careers, you sometimes interact with the people around you, but ultimately you are learning from someone that you work for, and quite nice to interact with other folks.
Definitely.
Was a bit of the crux of our conversation, I think. Also, Dwayne is lucky enough to be up in North Yorkshire today, where we agreed the sun is always shining, and he got out of London to come and be in God's own country for a day. So he's can't believe his luck, can you, Dwayne?
I grew up in Yorkshire, and I'm pretty sure it only ever rained.
Whoever said that is out of the networking group. I didn't see you unmuted, but that's our first sacking of the group.
Yeah. We know never to challenge Joe Hart. This is a learning curve.
Sorry,
no,
Sam,
I agree completely with Sam there.
Yeah. So that was our group, yeah.
Perfect. Saskia, do you want to go?
Yeah, I got loads actually. So I was in a group with Sam, who is not in Yorkshire now, he was in Edinburgh. Susie as well, and Stuart. Stuart's microphone wasn't quite working, so we did a bit of texting as well. So yeah, a bit of a range of people. We've got Sam's a fire engineer from OFR. We've got Susie, who you might have to forgive me, a fire safety manager. You work in, so you've done all sorts of different roles, looking at asbestos, looking at safety cases, housing. So a very breadth of experience. And key things that they really want to cover is a lot of technical skills, really. Maybe Susie's suggestion was how to translate a fire strategy into something that's easily understandable. What are the main takeaways? What do I need to be looking at? Looking a little bit more in depth at things. So what do the travel distances actually mean, rather than just being a number on a page or a magic number? Maybe delving into the post-war building studies a little bit and understanding, where these 18-metre rules came from, fire service access, and a bit on structural stuff, as I call it. That's definitely not going to be me taking that one, but yeah, definitely one that should be covered. Sam also mentioned about cavity barriers and fire stopping. And how we actually apply that. So it's great looking in ADB and 9999, but how, when we get that external wall detail, do we tell somebody exactly where they need something? And Stuart mentioned about mechanical ventilation in basement car parks. So that'd be a very technical one for a Wednesday afternoon. And the last one from Sam, which was a really good soft skills one, was saying no to clients. So being able to say, I've gone past my scope of services here, I've gone past my expertise, I've gone past my liability, and how do I deal with that? How do I get that personal relationship away from the client, and how do I approach it? So yeah, some good stuff from my team in there.
Very good. That's very good, actually. Good examples there. I have to admit, I was much less organised than you, so unfortunately my team didn't get to the feedback part. But what was nice is we had a good range of people in there. So we had Manlin, who actually happens to be another one of my colleagues at Sweco, who's a graduate fire engineer, and her background is very much in architecture and urban planning. So we've had that also from two means, being a graduate and also from delving into a completely different industry, which obviously she's getting to grips with now. So that was one kind of early career professional. Then we also had Mohammed, who was a graduate at BB7. under 1 year, who seems like a possible pro at CFD, who's really delved into that. So that's great. And actually came from a background of being a mechanical engineering graduate as well. Then we also have Michelle, who has 10 years experience in fire safety, but going back to what was spoken about before, obviously from the early career professionals can also be kind of changing the direction of your career. Michelle went from being in the fire service and now works as a building safety manager. So she's kind of changed career aspects and now is an early career professional in that kind of environment as well. So yeah, it seems like we've had, and then locations wise, we've got a good range. We've got Edinburgh, 2 in Manchester, London and West Sussex. So we'll have to collate all these locations and find the best the best location for which sounds like London currently at the minute, I'm not gonna lie.
Or Yorkshire.
Or Yorkshire, possibly.
Or Bury.
Joe's favourite.
Love Bury. Yeah.
So I think we're on track. We did agree that we just have very specific. I said an 8-minute break, although that's now down to 6 minutes. So for people just want to grab themselves a brew, some biscuits, hopefully not dinner if it's going to take a while to make. But Saskia will be starting her technical CPD at bob on 20 to 6. So people feel free to go and grab a brew or stay on chatting if you want.
Then, hi everybody. Sorry for that. So this is the first sort of early careers event CPD, focusing on industry change really. So it's probably one of those things that there's been an awful lot of CPD events on, a lot of chat about it, a lot of different things flying around. So the aim of this is to really just condense all that into one presentation. It's not going to cover absolutely everything, but just to give maybe the headline points, sort of looking at what we've seen to date, what's currently in motion, and just really focusing on the change itself that we've seen in the UK. So not really providing an opinion, just looking at what's been happening and what to expect. So I'm Saskia Stibbson-Wright, which feels a bit odd saying still. Just a brief background. I've been in the industry for 7 years, doing kind of a range of different roles, more commercial from the start and then into fire engineering. So now I'm a senior fire engineer at a company called Ashton Fire. And I've been mainly looking at fire safety design. So designing buildings, mostly sort of high-rise residential at the moment, but some offices, commercial, industrial. So a bit of experience over different sectors, really. So a bit of the same as Rhiannon here. All of the opinions are my own, even though I won't really be expressing an opinion. And so it's got no representation of the IFE. So I asked a couple of people, and this might be going on a bit, but I asked a couple of people what they thought of change. So those couple of people were a couple of colleagues. I asked a couple of family members. I even asked my husband what he thought of change and what came to mind. And I got a couple of suggestions. Some were words, some were questions, some were sort of how it made them feel. So a couple of those are, how do I adapt? The word opportunity came up quite a lot, actually, with quite a few people. It's an obstacle. We learn and improve. Keeping with the times. Technological advancements. We're evolving, so the word evolving came up quite a lot. A new challenge. And it's necessary, so that's a really interesting one as well. And the reason I really wanted to bring this up was because, in all honesty, I felt all of these things, and I think it's completely normal to feel that as well. So looking to the future is another one, and it's unnerving. I think my two there are opportunity and probably obstacle and unnerving. Change isn't easy, and it's not easy to ride change, and it's where we kind of must come together and deal with it as one, I suppose. So I think that me and Rhiannon have been looking at the same book, because I've got a quote as well. So the secret to change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but building on the new. So when we look at this from our perspective as fire professionals, and in the fire industry, or whether you're just starting in the fire industry, it is very, very true. There's always new advancements, new methods of construction. We've got CLT buildings being built. We've got very, very high-rise buildings being built. New materials, new processes, with new ways of constructing on site, modular buildings. And through that, we have to learn new things. We have to research, we have to understand these things. EV vehicles, lithium ion, you know, it's quite new. And how do we deal with that? You know, we have electric vehicles in car parks now, in underground car parks. You know, if there was a fire, how do we might not be able to fight that using conventional methods. And we can't cast a blind eye to that, because the world is evolving, and we've got to change. And I think the reason that a lot of us are in this Southern Branch is we want to pioneer that change, and we want to be a part of that change. So after all that, a bit to the boring bit, I suppose, might be not to some people, but a bit of a list of some of the changes you might have seen to date. You might have seen them, you might have not. It doesn't matter if you have, it doesn't matter if you've not, but here's just a couple. You probably will be able to list a few more. So we've had changes to Regulation 7. So following Grenfell, we were looking at the amendments to Regulation 7 and introducing 7.2. So materials on relevant buildings being Class A2 S1 D0 or better. And actually since then, I believe it was in the June 2020 version of ADB, that's actually been brought down to 11 metres as well. So buildings that are over 11 metres that have that residential purpose group are now need to be A2 S1 D0. And there's obviously that very big list of exemptions that you may have seen in 7.3 that don't have to achieve that standard. So that's the first one. So that's quite a big one. It's been quite heavy in the news. You might have seen it in a lot of places. Second one is height threshold for sprinklers. Can't quite recall. I think this was in 2021 that this got reduced to 11 metres from 30 metres, but you'll have to, if I've got that quite wrong. And the next one was wayfinding signage. So in all residential buildings over 11 metres, signage is required for the fire service so that they can identify different floors and different flats. And that looks at things like the placement of those signage, and the wording and how that is implemented in buildings. Another big one, and I am really focusing quite heavily on these top ones of fire engineering really, and the approved documents, but the provision of evacuation alert systems in blocks of flats over 18 metres. So the purpose of that system in residential buildings is so that firefighters can manually evacuate maybe a story or 2 stories at a time, which sort of bypasses that stay put evacuation strategy. So there will be an alarm that will sound on a story and everybody can evacuate instead of people remaining in place. Because with a remain in place policy, you would have your alarm going in with your flat, but if you were your next door neighbour and there was no fire or smoke in your apartment, your alarm wouldn't go off because it's a Part 6 system. But this almost bypasses that system, and will evacuate manually at the firefighter's discretion. We've also seen changes to the fire safety bill. Won't go into too much details, but that was an amendment to the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order of 2005, where external walls and the structure of the building and flat entrance doors actually became, the responsible person must manage the risk of those areas. And the fire service actually have the right to enforce and hold building owners responsible if anything was wrong with those external walls or the flat doors. So that came within that jurisdiction. The next one, and probably the one that we've probably heard the most about recently, is the Building Safety Act and the implementation of Gateway 1. So Gateway 1 is fully underway at the moment. So the Building Safety Act was really to transform the regulatory regime for higher risk buildings. So higher risk buildings are your 7 stories or above or over 18 metres. So it's a stricter regulatory regime that we will go through a little bit more detail after. So these are some of the changes that we've seen to date. So we've seen the sprinkler threshold be reduced. We've seen wayfinding signage being needed. We've seen evacuation alert systems. And as they've come, we've dealt with them as they've come. We've updated our fire strategies. We've advised clients that these are the oncoming changes and this is what it means for their buildings and this is what it means for their programmes or their budgets, because these are the new regulations. But how do we prepare for any future change or anything that's in the pipeline at the moment? How do we deal with that? And it's not really an easy answer. It's not a one size fits all answer. Different organisations will have their own ways of advising clients. Like I said, the aim of this really is to just look at those changes and what the challenges you personally think that there might be. So a big one at the moment is the London Plan 2021. So I probably could have included this within changes that have already taken place, but I think this is quite a pertinent one to have a bit of a chat about, really. So if you weren't aware, there was a London Plan document produced, which was about providing good growth for London and its boroughs, and definitely to commit to diversity inclusion there, as it says. And it mainly was a spatial development strategy for the Greater London area. So the 2 areas I'm going to focus on really are Policy D5 and Policy D12. There are obviously other parts of the London Plan that we need to take into consideration, but I think just these 2 are the really, really pertinent points. So Policy D12, we'll probably skip to D12 for D5, but we'll start with that one. So D12 looks at producing a fire statement. So I think that actually Joe Hart, who's on this call, did a session on fire statements. So you'll be able to go onto the IFE Southern Branch website and do a full hour session on that. So I won't go into too much detail, but a fire statement is generally required for relevant buildings. So that's anywhere in the country. If it's a relevant building, a fire statement will be required. But in London, regardless of whether it's a relevant building, they are required for all major developments. I know the next question is probably going to be, what is a major development in London? There is a definition, and from the top of my head, it's something about there being 10 residential dwellings, half a hectare, and or that there's some other parameters about it being 1,000 metres squared in area. But yeah, I'll get back to you on that one of the exact definition, but just remember that if it's a major development in London, it will need a fire statement. Anywhere else in the UK, it's just if it's a relevant building. That being said as well, there is policy D12A, which requires that if it isn't a major development or a relevant building in London, it still does require something called a planning fire safety statement. For any kind of application. So that means if you've got a house and you put an extension on your house, it probably isn't count as a major development or a relevant building, but it will count as under policy D12A. So you will need to provide a planning fire safety statement for that. Quite confusing. There is a really, really good table on the London Plan website. So let me know if you want me to put that in the chat afterwards. And as it says there, I'm guessing some people may have seen a fire statement before, but it is kind of a government template that we all need to follow. And really it looks at, you know, what kind of measures are put into the building, what's the building constructed of. So if it's over 80 metres, it will need to comply with regulation 7.2. Means of escape, active fire safety features, if there's any facilities for the fire service, whether evacuation lifts have been incorporated, another big one that we'll go on to, what additional fire safety features have been provided, whether a planning gateway 1 fire statement has been submitted, and there's also other things on there. So is there anything, is the building complex in any way? So if you're a fire engineer, you might be looking at, oh, there's an extended travel distance, and how have I dealt with that? Are we doing CFD modelling to demonstrate the performance of that system? So that's a little bit about fire statements. So just remember, if you're anywhere else in England, relevant buildings need a fire statement, but if you're in London, you're a little bit different. You will need a planning fire safety statement for anything, but anything that's a major development or a relevant building, you will need a proper fire statement for. So the big topic at the moment has been around evacuation lifts, and policy D5 revolves around inclusive design. So making sure that people who may be have disabilities or maybe less ambulant are able to get out of the building if there was an emergency or a fire. So policy D5, and I will show you the extract out of that in a second, looks at providing an evacuation lift associated with each core. And it's a lift that's specifically designed as a means of escape for people who require level access or assistance. They generally will operate as a passenger lift, but they will have additional electrical and fire protection features. So, for example, they'll have a secondary backup supply, whereas a passenger lift wouldn't. They will be of a certain depth to allow for disabled persons to get into the lift. There may be an EVC, so an emergency voice communication system directly outside the lift. And these will generally be controlled by trained building management operators and or the fire service. So here's that extract from directly from policy D5 there. So I'll just highlight, so London policy D5 states that where a lift is installed in development, at least one lift per core or more should be a suitably sized evacuation lift. So just noting here as well that it actually doesn't say that this is just for relevant buildings or for residential buildings. This could be for your office block. This could be for your leisure centre. If there's a core, a stair core, it is a planning requirement that you provide an evacuation lift if that building is in London. So I've got a couple of questions, but before, and really I think this is supposed to be a bit more thought-provoking than to provide an answer. So evacuation lifts are only a local planning requirement for schemes in London. So they're not a planning requirement for anywhere else in England, and they're definitely not a building regulations requirement. So they, you can't be turned away at building approval stage because you've not got an evacuation lift at the moment. So my first question is, how do we protect evacuation lifts within non-residential buildings? So to provide a bit of a quick answer to that, if you might be familiar with BS 21999, that has a section, I think it's Annex G from memory, which looks at evacuation lifts and how we protect evacuation lifts. And it's all about providing a lobby in front of that evacuation lift for somebody to safely wait for the arrival of the lift. How do we adequately protect evacuation lifts within residential buildings? Bit of a slightly different one. So I'm not going to provide any sort of opinion here because I think different consultancies and different fire engineers have different viewpoints on this. But then the draft BS 9991, which I'll come on to in a minute, looks at actually providing a lobby in front of that lift and ventilating that lobby independently from the common corridors. Because if you've got somebody in a residential flat and they need to use the evacuation lift, they will ultimately be sitting in the common corridor waiting for that lift. That common corridor might be filled with smoke. And so the idea is to provide a safe space, safe refuge in front of that lift. And like I've said, different organisations might have different ways of protecting that. They might be looking at providing inlets and extracting from the corridors. ADB and 9991 gives, the current 9991 gives no guidance very much in how to adequately protect them and safeguard them. And so we're coming up with solutions. This is where change, you know, we're riding the tide of change. We're understanding what the problem is and how we can deal with it, and how we can show that those people are safe waiting for that lift. My next question was, London Plan guidance states that evacuation lifts should be operated by a trained personnel or building management. How do you think this might work in residential buildings that are generally unmanaged? I'm not going to try and answer that, even though I came up with the question. I think it's maybe one to think about. A lot of residential buildings might have off-site management. They might have no on-site management at all, and things might not be remotely monitored. So how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to make sure that people are able to use these evacuation lifts? Even though evacuation lifts are only a planning requirement within London, do you think that there's a way in which guidance is evolving? So this might be one to ask yourself, really. Do you think that evacuation lifts will ultimately become a requirement, a building regulations requirement, and not just a planning requirement in London? Do you think that's the way we should go? Personal opinion, yeah, I think that evacuation lifts are definitely a good thing if they're adequately protected. But that's obviously for the government to put that in regulation if they see fit. And do you think that evacuation lifts become a requirement in all developments? Again, I'll leave that to you. And maybe the next couple of slides might shed a little bit of light on that as well. So that's a bit about London Plan. We've got 5 statements that we might be aware of, and we've got these evacuation lifts coming in that are a planning requirement in London. If you've got a non-resi building, you can generally look at 9999 to protect those. But if you're in a residential buildings, you might need to have a bit of a further think about how you might protect that lift. Next, so the next big change, and it's a change that's we're well underway with, but is definitely coming. You might be aware that 9991, which is generally the residential standard, is in draft format. It's received over 2,000 consultation responses, so that they're currently trying to go through those consultation responses and produce this new guidance document. It was expected to be released later this year. However, this may be pushed back. What I've done here is I've tried to list some of the main changes between the current 9991 that we have, which was the 2015 version, and the draft 9991. This list isn't exhaustive. It's kind of just some of the main ones that I've picked out. So I'll do these really, really quickly. So single stair buildings over 18 metres. A very major one here was that the stair will need to be pressurised. Your structural fire protection would need to be increased from 60 to 90 minutes. Your structure does not comprise of timber, so that includes any sort of structure with cross-laminated timber, CLT. An additional lobby is required between the stair and the common corridor. Your stairs would need to have a minimum width of 1200. So generally guidance needs us to have, if it's a firefighting stair in a residential building, 1100, but this would need to be increased to 1200. And if extended travel distances are present within a common corridor, you would need additional mechanical smoke ventilations in addition to your stair pressurisation. So there's also questions there of how your pressurisation system and your mechanical smoke ventilation system would work together. Would they work together? How do we use 2 different systems in 2 different areas, and how would they interact? Couple of other changes. So we've got some changes to secondary power supplies. So the secondary power can no longer be via the same substation. Your secondary power needs to be provided by a generator, an independent HV supply, or a UPS. You can also use batteries if that's kind of a low voltage. So maybe some lighting or signage that might be quite low voltage, but generally UPS, generator, or independently fed. There's now a defined distance between cooking hobs and the escape route within an apartment. So generally that's about 1.8 meters should be left between your hob and your escape route, with a further 0.9 clearance, and that's for somebody less ambulant who would be able to go past the hob. There's some new cross references. So we obviously had the new sprinkler standard, which is BS 9251 for residential buildings. So that's now referenced in the draft as the 2021 version. We've got the requirement for the emergency alert systems as per the new update to ADB. Big one, number 6, requirement for evacuation lifts. So the BS 1991 draft has actually taken the planning requirement for evacuation lifts to the next level, and is saying that this is now required in residential buildings provide an evacuation lift, and in accordance with 9991 that would be a requirement now. So that kind of answers our last question of where do you think this is going? And the changes to the suitability of natural smoke shafts. So if you've got a building that's over 30 metres in height, natural smoke shafts, your 1.5 metre square natural smoke shaft that may be ventilating your common corridor may be unsuitable. So those are some of the changes to 1991. And I think it's really important to notice now that we cannot design to the draft document at the moment because it's draft. We need to be aware of those changes because we do need to advise clients that these changes are coming, so it's good to be aware of them, but we can't design to 1991. At the same time, you might be designing a building at the moment to the current day standard 1991, which is fine, absolutely fine. It's the standard at the time, but just be aware that this new draft may come into action, and that might have quite detrimental impacts on your build or your design. And it's just good to make your clients aware of that there may be those changes incoming, because they may be able to highlight that as a risk item. Changes to other standards you might have been aware of is the new 9251, the sprinkler standard, and quite a new one, a hot topic at the moment is the 7671, which is the electrical routing electrical through protected escape routes. One quite hot off the press, I think, and I think generally I've had a lot of emails in my inbox around that standard and how it's applied. Let me know if you want any further information on that. So I've been talking for half an hour already and I've still not talked about the Building Safety Act, so here we go. I am going to skim through this one because I feel like the Building Safety Act has been very much talked about, and I'm not going to go through all of the main points, but some changes to date that you'll probably be aware of. The specific controls have been put in place for higher risk relevant buildings, and this is this new Building Safety Act and the gateways. It also applies, don't forget, to hospitals and care homes at the same height threshold, so 7 stories or 18 metres, whichever you hit first. So if your building is 7 stories but is 17.79, it will still be a relevant building even though it doesn't hit both thresholds. So the HSE is a statutory planning consultee for high-risk buildings. So at Gateway 1, all of your HRBs need to go through HSE for comment. And the building self-regulator will ultimately become the building control authority for high-rise buildings. So there'll be no duty holder choice on whether they go for local authority building control, approved inspector. There will be no choice on build control provider. But they will, from memory, get in a multidisciplinary team. So they will bring in people from the fire service, from building control to get the knowledge to appraise these buildings. So all of these resident buildings will need to pass through the gateways 1, 2 and 3. A golden threaded information will need to be stored. We've heard of that golden thread term. Needs to be created, stored and maintained. It's not about gaining as much information as we possibly can on a building so that we've got thousands of hundreds and thousands of millions of documents. It's about having relevant and pertinent information on a building and storing that as well so that it is there for the lifetime and even up until demolition of that building. There's now definitive responsibilities for duty holders and clarity around what the actual role of an accountable person is. So Gateway 1 came into force on 2021 August, and it was amendment to the planning legislation. So I think it's the Towns and Country Planning Act, it's either 90 or 1999. And the aim of this really is that the fire safety considered as early as possible. So we're talking REBA stage 2, 3 here. So we're looking at, if you're a fire engineer, we're looking at concept design. We're going to be consulted really, really early in the day. And to be honest, it's not a bad thing. We don't want to be the back of the list when it comes to fire safety. We need to be at the front with the structural engineers and MEP to make sure that things are well and truly being thought of before we get to REBA stage 3 and 4. And the HSE, as I said before, is a statutory consultee for those relevant planning applications. So Gateway 2 isn't quite in motion just yet, but it's set to be incoming from October 2023. And as I've already alluded to, the BSR will become the Building Control Authority. And I think the most important thing to mention here is that before any work can commence on site, anything at all, approval must be granted. So you cannot put your first spade in the soil until you've had absolute approval from the BSR that they're happy with the proposals. They may need to speak to building control or any other third parties. And this is what's called a hard stop. So if they start on site and it hasn't got approval, it's a hard stop. No further. And this is, I suppose, to prevent construction work from undergoing before approval's been granted or all the information's been provided, to sort of prevent any hiccups, really. Gateway 3. So this feels like quite a long time in the future from now, but I'll give some kind of little bit of background to this. So this is generally at completion stage, and the duty holder must submit all of that as-built information, including something called a declaration of compliance with the building regulations. So they can actually say this building absolutely complies with the building regs. Here's the as-built strategy. Here's the as-built fire strategy that's been through approvals. And once the regulator, so once the BSR are absolutely happy, and they've consulted with this multidisciplinary team, which is the fire service, they might have a few structural engineers, building control, a completion certificate will be issued. But it's important to note that once that completion certificate has been issued, the building can't be occupied until a building assurance certificate, so a BCA, is issued. So that's a bit of very, very quick of the gateways and how it kind of relates to us and those hoops that we need to jump through. So again, Gateway 2, we can't start on site until they're happy, until everything's in place, the design is ready and the BSR are happy with it. And again, Gateway 3 can't occupy the building again until the BSR are satisfied and that building assurance certificate has been issued. So my last topic, really, in terms of change, it is single stairs in residential buildings. Again, quite a hot topic at the moment. So I'm just going to provide the very background. So if you're not aware, on the 14th of December 2022, the National Fire Chiefs Council, which is the NFCC, provided a position statement really on providing a single stair policy within residential buildings. So it's their view that that buildings over 18 metres in height need to be provided with more than one staircase. And they've used this 18-metre rule really because it aligns with the BSA, the Building Safety Act definition of a relevant building. And they've made this position statement as a call to government for this to be changed, for this to be implemented for all buildings, all residential buildings over 18 metres of height need to have a second stair core. So a couple of days before Christmas last year, DLUC, which is Department for Levelling Up Housings and Communities, opened up their own consultations, and this was on various aspects of ADB. So I think there was something on care homes too, and there was also a section on single staircases within residential buildings. This was one of a number of consultation areas. So this consultation area was to ask for views really on what this threshold should be. So the NFCC have said 18 metres, and they're asking what do people think that this threshold should be? Should it be 18, 11, even down to 11 metres, 18 metres, 30 or 50? They've stated that their preferred option is 30 metres. Again, it's up in the air. We can't advise on something that isn't quite there yet, but we can advise that something is coming, change is coming. So to finish that section, really, how do we advise clients? So with this one in particular, on the single stairs, two stairs, the most important thing to note is consultation is still ongoing. There is still no definitive answer. We've got NFCC saying 18, we've got other parties saying other thresholds, we've got DLUC preferring the 30 metres. It's still very much in the air. And there, my second point is we need to acknowledge to clients that we can't provide a definitive answer. If somebody says, I've got a 30-metre building, do I need to provide a second stair? We can't say yes, absolutely, because we don't know what that threshold might be. We can advise them that it might be less of a risk to put a second stair in. But again, it's about the way that we state that and we give them all of the facts up front. The next thing to be really careful of is being aware that if this does become a requirement, depending on if there's any kind of transitional periods, two stairs may become mandatory. So if you've got your single stair building, you've come to finishing your detailed fire strategy on it, you've not yet submitted for planning for building regs application. If that document then changes or the requirement then changes, we might be in a position where we've got to put another stair in that building and it's already very far down the line to put another stair in. And that might have impacts on your floor areas, how many units you can provide, how many residential units you can provide. It's going to have significant cost associated with it. I think that somebody said, I've had a scheme before where they've said that it was something like 3 or 4 million by putting another stair core in because of the amount that they would lose off apartments. So there is risk in redesigning a scheme late on. But there is, again, we go back and forth, argument for future-proofing development. So advising clients is very much, I would go back to your own organisations. I would see how your organisation's dealing with this change. My own personal opinion is I am being quite transparent about this. I'm saying that this, there is this consultation, this is a risk. How do you want to proceed? But it's ultimately not really our responsibility to give that answer because we can't provide that definitive answer just yet. So just a couple of summary questions after I've gone off for about 40 minutes, but adapting into day-to-day, everything that I've just gone on about, my piece of advice would be to just be transparent. Nobody knows all the answers. Changes is constantly evolving. The evacuation lifts, advise that this is a planning requirement just for London, but this could become a building regulations requirement. We don't know, but it could do. Should we be moving more towards inclusive design? I think so. but ultimately it's the client who is at the end of the day paying for all of this. So we do need to recognise that at the same time. And it depends as well where your bounds are. Are you looking at life safety? Are you looking at proper protection as well? Are you looking at business continuity? So all these things do add up. So how do I advise clients given there's so much uncertainty? As I've just said, be transparent with them. We can't give a definitive answer. We can't say it's going to be this threshold, it's going to be that threshold, but we can say that it's going under consultation. Might be a good idea to look at the design and putting a second stair in and understanding what those cost aspects and implications might be. How do I keep in tune with changes and updates? Things are changing an awful lot. Have a look at the some of the British Standard websites if you're looking at any sort of updates to 9991. The government website as well also provides updates on the BSA and any secondary legislation coming from that. Oh, let's just go back, sorry. That should say any questions, but thank you everybody. I really do hope you found that useful. I was trying to condense everything, all the changes that we've seen to date and some of the trickier changes that we're kind of undergoing at the moment, and try and put them together and try and provide some sort of guidance on how to advise clients. You know, at the end of the day, we don't know the answer, and we can only guide them in the right direction. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off this PowerPoint and I'm going to turn off the recording. The idea of this being we want to prompt communication and discussion between us all without being recorded, kind of thing. And I'm going to ask the other members of the branch as well to put their cameras on. And we're going to have a bit of a round table discussion just for 10 minutes if that would be good. Let me stop sharing.